What's up, boys? Hey.
What's happening?
What's going on? Should we do our normal weather report update?
Oh, God. Just because you guys like to torment me.
Well, yeah, there's a bit of that. So, rainy and 70 degrees. Rob, what do you got?
72 and sunny.
Kevin?
It's snowing right now. So I know it's below 32. We'll just say that.
All right. Well, now that we got that out of the way, I want to say hello and welcome. My name is Steve Teresi. I'm the VP of Technical Services here at JL Audio, and I am talking to you from our main headquarters, right next to where we make all the cool stuff, right next door. I am joined today, as always, by Mr. Rob Haynes, joining us from Southern California, where it's 72 and sunny. Say hello, Rob.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
And from the frozen tundra of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, please say hello to Kevin Ferry. Hi, Kevin.
What's happening, everybody? Thanks for hanging out with us this afternoon.
Excellent. So we got an interesting session put together for you today. We're going to get a bit deeper into what you can do with targets and measuring to or tuning to a target response. And this one gets in deep pretty good. So we're going to go through and I'll give you an outline of what we're going to cover. And then we'll get into it with some live measurements. So if you have questions, you can ping the guys in the chat. Kevin and Rob will be keeping an eye on that. I'm going to be focused on a different machine, so I won't even see anything you guys are saying about me, so be nice. And we'll do our best to get to any questions either during the process or immediately following some of the things that we want to show you. This one's a good one. This is a thank you for tuning in live. This is one you don't want to miss. So let's why don't we switch over and show my little keynote thingy here.
You got it. And it's that's the one we want to bring in.
There we go. So a deeper look, and that is an understatement. So here is what we are going to get into. So let me switch down to this. Tuning to a target. We're going to talk about what is a target. We're going to compare electrical versus an actual target. I want you to see what the target is actually representing. Once you know what the target is, we're going to talk about how that's different from a normal audio system. So once we know that the target is like an electrical signal, we'll talk about how a target is not exactly the same as an acoustic signal, or is it? We'll get on to that. From there, we're going to start making sense of the data that you're looking at on the screen and how that can kind of play into what you're really looking at and what to tune and what not to tune. And that's where I'm going to come back to smoothing is your friend. This is something that you're going to like. And then we'll talk about the tools that you can use to make things work. So we'll start off with, like, what is the target? Consider it a reference. And from here, I'm going to jump off of the keynote, if you don't mind. Who's my producer? Is it going to be Kevin or Rob?
I gotcha.
All right, so Kevin, if you could switch over to this computer over here, I want to kind of explain what we're talking about when we talk about targets in general. So what I'm going to do is I have an amplifier connected to my computer here, and on my setup, you'll see I have a left and right input that's being used to drive every channel on this amplifier, right? These two channels right here are going through to the preamp output. So from the preamp output, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare a left and a right channel. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to jump into the measure tab. Obviously, I have a max box connected. I'm going to go up to the settings in the upper left-hand corner, and I'll click on that, and I'll undock this thing, this measure settings pop-out window. So there's three tabs in here: general signal generator and the measurement setup. And in measurement setup, what I've done is the max box has a high-level input 1 and a high-level input 2. And what I've done is I have an XLR to RCA connection, and I've plugged in the RCAs. A left RCA is going to the left pre-out. A right RCA is going to the right pre-out. And what I've done is I've created what's known as a transfer function engine. And what this means is I'm going to compare the left channel as a measurement, and the right channel will be my reference. And what I'm going to show you basically is any changes I make on the left channel will show up as a difference compared to the right. What we're looking at are the differences between the two channels. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we go through this process. The changes I make on the left channel, like if I put in a high-pass filter, you'll see the shape of that high-pass filter. If I put on an EQ, you'll see the shape of that EQ because it's different than the channel that I didn't affect. So instead of talking about it, let's go ahead and do it. All right, so that's what I've done there. So on this top graph here, I'm looking at magnitude response, which in simple terms is the difference between the measure and the reference. So you'll see the deviation. On the bottom, I have linear impulse response, or LIN-IR. So on the top, I'm going to select my input. It's going to come from that transfer function engine that I just set up. And on the bottom, I'm also going to select the transfer function engine, TF6, the purple one. I like the color purple. So it works for me. So on the top right now, you'll see that the left channel is perfectly the same as the right channel. There is no difference, right? So if down here in the lower right, if I mute that channel, you'll see the signal goes away. So this is truly a live measurement. So if I bring it back in, it all comes right back up. You can barely see it, I think. I can't see how clear it is on Facebook, but this spike right here is the impulse response. And what that's basically showing us is the beginning of the signal, like when the signal starts, right? So you can kind of see, let me move this over a little bit. I'm going to make this. So that is the impulse response. That's what's happening. So let me kind of, let's just leave it as is, right? Maybe a little tighter on that, right? Come on. There we go. So the signal, it's silent, it's silent, it's silent, and then it happens, and then it goes away. Like it's perfect. It's an electrical signal, and it's dead on. This amplifier is doing exactly what we'd expect it to do. No signal, suddenly signal, and then no ringing afterwards. It's just perfectly clean, and it's perfectly flat. That's what the magnitude response is showing. If I come down here and I put on a high-pass filter, it automatically mutes because this is controlling the DSP and is concerned about popping and things like that. So we unmute it, and it's right now it's a high-pass filter, 20 hertz, and you can see the deviation up on the top. It's rolling off. You can't really see it, but the impulse response has also changed. We'll do that. I'm going to show you that in a moment as I make this more dramatic. So instead of 20 hertz, I'm going to start raising this up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the scale on the bottom. You can kind of see it's offset a little bit. Can they see that, guys, or is that not really visible? Here's what I'll do. I'll zoom out.
It's visible.
And then I'll kind of zoom in a bit. So you see how it wiggles down a little bit?
There you go. Now you can really see it.
Yeah, so it's offset. And if I raise this up, it'll offset more. And you can see it changing in real time. So let's put something like an 80 hertz filter on there, right? So that's an 80 hertz high pass on the left channel compared to the right channel. And that's the difference. I can do the same thing with an EQ. If I come up here and I take an EQ, I could pull an EQ down and you'll see the impulse response is changing, right? I could do that. I can do a little bit of a boost if I want to. I wanted to show you this because the impulse response is a direct reflection of whatever's happening with the signal itself. So the magnitude response is affecting the impulse response, which is related to the phase response, as you'll see in a moment. The reason why this is important is because everything that you're going to do to tune a system is going to be using these very same tools, and our target generator will mimic these. And that's where it gets really cool. So this is an electrical signal here. So I had high pass. I could do a low pass. You want? Should I try a low pass?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's throw a low pass on there just to see what happens, right? It mutes, as we expect. Unmute it. You see the impulse response has already shifted. I'm going to lower my frequency. You'll see the impulse is shifting quite dramatically. I'm going to zoom out and then back in so you can kind of see what's happening with that, right? Let me go this way. Right. So there's our impulse response. And as I lower the low pass filter, you see that's changing. Impulse response is heavily driven by the high frequency content. And if you start filtering it off, you'll see a change in the shape of that impulse response. There is no such thing as a bad impulse response or a good impulse response in terms of the shape or what it's actually doing. You could get a noisy impulse response, but that's different. In terms of a good or a bad one, there's really nothing. It's just whatever it is. So as you make changes to one channel on this amplifier, it's being reflected in the magnitude as well as in the time domain, as you can see here.
You know, what's cool is as you're bringing that that filter down, you can see that peak also come down also and give it a more rounded shape, and kind of goes back to, you know, being able to see different types of drivers and their reaction when you're looking at the IRs. It's super cool.
Exactly. Excellent point, Kevin. So there's a couple other time-related tools I want to show you. So remember, on the top graph, this is the frequency response. And you know we have a high-pass filter, we have a couple of EQ bands, and we have a low-pass filter. I'm going to go ahead and flip the polarity to see what happens. The magnitude comes right back to where it was, but now my impulse response has flipped. That's a polarity inversion. I'm going to put it back to the way it was. Then I'm going to turn on an all-pass filter. You'll see that the magnitude response doesn't change, but my impulse response changes. The impulse response is directly related to the phase response. So if I switch to that, that's the phase response of this signal on the top. So what I can do here is I can show you what happens in the time domain. Actually, let me go back to IR. So this is my IR. If I add delay, we can expect that adding delay is going to move my impulse response. This is the time window of when something starts. If I delay it, it should move to the right. If I speed it up, if I could do that, if I could speed up time somehow, it would move to the left. So I'm going to go ahead and increase delay. And you see my impulse response is shifted. If I go to my phase response now, my phase response has this weird funkiness going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo the delay. That's without any delay. As I add delay, you'll see that the purple wraps on the bottom are getting steeper and steeper. This is delay. We're adding delay. So the steeper the wraps are on the bottom here, the steeper you see these lines, those are things that are happening later and later. And that'll be very important as we start doing our actual matching to target. They'll definitely come into play. Okay, so just wanted to show you that. I'm going to zero that out just for now. Now I want to show you how the electrical measurement is directly related to the target. So I'm going to switch to my targets mode. I'm going to turn on target 5, which is one, I forgot to, I'm going to reset that, right? So there's nothing. So there's my flat line. That's the reference. And here you see the phase is flat and the magnitude is flat. So I'm going to do a little opposite here. I'm going to match my target to the electrical response that I just created so you can see how close it can be. I can't remember what I did. So I'm going to, up here, I'm going to, I know there's a high pass filter. I don't remember what frequency that was at. So it doesn't matter because what I can do, it doesn't mute, right? So I can take this and I'm going to move it up until it matches up with that electrical. There we go. I'm going to turn on my low pass because I know I have a low pass one on there. And again, I'm going to lower this until it matches up. Pretty close. Why doesn't it light up, Kevin?
Either the EQ bands.
There you go. So what I'm going to do is the purple one here has a dip. So I'm going to take the EQ on the target, and I know I'm on a target because of the bright orange bar. I'm going to take this and I'm going to pull this down and try to make that match. That's pretty close, huh? All right. And then here I got to boost this up a little bit, right? Something like that, right? So this guy here, all right. So I still have some weirdness there. Oh, you know why? Let's look at our IRs. Ah, look at this. So when I zoom out, look at that. You see that? I'm toggling between the target and the actual measured response. So the purple is the measured response. The target is this greenish one. So I'm going to zoom in on that a bit so you can see it a little bit closer. And you should see some variance in it. There's a variance, right? So what did I miss, Kev? There's something. Oh, the all-pass filter. See, I could see there was something going on. But let me go back. So here, turn that guy off. Viola. And you'll see right in this area here that my time window is a little bit off. If I take this and I shift it, actually I got to go to my output, and put that as my reference. There we go. So now my impulse responses are nearly identical. I can't remember what's going on here. So, no, it's the wrong one. Shape that over a bit. So you can see anything that I do here is going to be reflected as a mimic, right? So there we go. All right. There we go. So anything I did to the target is exactly the same as if I did it with a real DSP, which is an incredibly powerful tool. This is one of the reasons why it's not just a pretty line on the screen. There's actually a lot more going on. There's a time-based measurement that's happening with that. So when you put the targets on your screen, it's not just a pretty line. It's the same thing as if you had the DSP control for the target that you can now mimic. So instead of doing that, just use the target generator. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn off my transfer function engine from the amplifier. I'm going to turn on the measurement for this particular vehicle, right? I'm going to turn this one off and turn on my measurement.
So as you're doing that, I just want to say, so what you're saying, Steve, is for free, somebody could download Tune 4 and be able to go through and mimic all of that stuff that you just did by using the target gen.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Who's the crazy one that did that, huh? Okay. So now what I have is a mid-range target on this car, and the pink fuzzy stuff along the top of this is something known as coherence, and this is a nice way of knowing when there's a good correlation between the signal that's coming out of the amplifier effectively, or the signal's coming from the signal generator from the Max box, and the audio that's being captured by the microphones. Right now, it's terrible because I don't have any audio playing. So I'm going to unmute a mid-range channel, and you'll see that that line is going to get nice and tight across the top. You'll have a couple of spikes over here on the high frequencies because it's outside of the band of this particular driver, so it's not correlated to the actual speaker itself. So you can see that my measured response is well above my target. Down here is my impulse response, and I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit. So if I toggle off the measured trace, you can see the target in the back, and you see my measured trace is actually showing up earlier. It's to the left. To the left is early, down and to the right would be late, right? Or to the right would be late. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on the beginning of this IR, the measured IR. Hang on, scale in. And it looks like right in this area is where that's going to start. If I right-click, that sets it as time 0. So I'm going to zoom out again and then zoom back in. And this is important because when you have everything lined up, it makes a lot more sense when you start looking at phase and things like that, right? So even if I stop there, so you can see here, I've aligned the two. They're both starting at pretty much the same spot. So this means I can do a direct comparison between the two when I look at the time domain. So back up to the magnitude response. Obviously, this particular driver is playing a lot more information than what the target is asking for. So I'm going to put on a high-pass filter. I'm also going to turn on a low-pass filter because I know I'm going to need it. So when you do that, the software will automatically mute the output. You have to come in and unmute it to save myself some time by turning them both on. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to raise my high-pass filter frequency, and you'll see my magnitude response changing at some point. All right, there we go. As it comes down, what I'm trying to do is I'm going to try to get this red line to match up with this gray line down at this lower point here, the operating bandwidth of it. So I'm going to keep raising that up until it gets really close. And this is how I would recommend doing it. You know, if you guys are tuning a car or something like that, or a boat, try to get it as close as you can on that lower part. I think that's pretty good. What do you think, Kev?
Yeah, she looks real good.
Excellent. So I'll do the same thing on the high frequencies. I'll lower that until it gets close in the same way, right around that point around 5K or whatever that is. So a little bit lower, maybe a little higher. You're looking to get it so that it kind of straddles. You don't want your EQ to have to boost. You want more cut than boost. So if you get it pretty darn close, you can get there. Now, I do want to point out that right now I'm using what's known as 1/24th octave smoothing, right? And what that means is I'm going to see a lot of extra energy. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs, a lot of jaggedness, technical terms, and I apologize. But you can see in this particular one, on the left side of the graph, there's less jaggedness than on the right side of the graph. This jaggedness is actually showing some of the reflected energy in the vehicle. I'm going to show how you can kind of see through some of that by using the smoothing as we go further. So I just want you to notice that on the right side of the measured data, it's more jagged than on the left side. Okay. So now that I have it pretty much shaped on the left side and the right side for my high and low pass filters, I'm going to open up the EQ, pull up the EQ panel. I'm going to move this over here so you can see what's happening. And I want to make sure my measured data is selected, and I can tell that my red cursor is tracking that data, so I know it's in front. The Z key can change that as I toggle between, right? So with the live data showing, I'm going to hit the auto set EQ. It's going to run through the equalization process, and when it's done, all of that will come down, and it's shaped pretty closely. Now, I know what some of you guys are thinking. Wow, there's a bunch of stuff that I bet I could fix. All of these little jaggedness. Remember, if it's a null point like that, you're going to have to try to boost that with an EQ. And that could be a waste of energy. This could be something other than the speaker that's doing this. But how can you possibly tell? Let's get into that right now. First of all, you'll notice that my impulse responses have changed now that I've applied all that filtering. The high and low pass filters, as well as the EQs, have caused the impulse response to change, just like it did on the regular DSP, because this is the DSP. So the target, it's a direct replica of this. And ideally, they should be identical, but right now they're not. I want to show you something neat. On this top graph here, I'm going to change the smoothing from 1/24th to 1/12th. Some of the jaggedness has gone away. What smoothing does with Intune 4 software is it removes reflected energy from the measured data. And the best way to see this is right now, if I look at the IRs, they have shifted a little bit, right? They were more lined up before, but that's before I put filters on there. So if I zoom in just a little bit more, I want to get my phase data to be a little bit easier to look at. You see that my red trace is starting a bit later. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to have it start here. So now the two are starting again pretty much at the same spot. So I can look at phase more meaningfully, right? The phase wraps, remember, steep phase wraps like you see right in this 2K area, that is coming later. Anything that's very steep is arriving later. Remember we added delay and we saw those wraps get more steep from the right side. Anything that is steep is arriving later. As I apply more smoothing to the measured data, you'll see that the steepness is going away. The later energy is being filtered out. As I go down to 1/3 octave smoothing, you'll see again, it's becoming less steep. In other words, reflected energy, or sorry, I should say the late arriving energy, which is the reflected energy. It's happening after the initial signal. That late arriving energy is being filtered out to the point where the speakers, the measurement is becoming more and more anechoic or less reflective in nature. And by the time I get to octave smoothing, I'm effectively just looking at what the driver is doing without any of that reflected energy, which is unlike anything that I've seen from anybody in terms of measurement systems, with very rare exceptions. This is a very powerful tool because in reality, you're not tuning your car. You're tuning the system in the car to compensate for what the car is doing. The controls that you have in your DSP are controlling an electrical signal that's being sent through your speakers and being captured by the microphones. The microphones are also capturing all reflected energy. So if this is coming off of, let's say, a glass reflection, there's nothing you could do in the DSP to stop that reflection from happening. You just can't, unless you want to move the tweeter or the mid-range in this case, or move the windshield or the reflective boundary. Those are mechanical changes. If you're using the DSP, knowing that our target is basically the DSP, you can get rid of the reflected energy and focus on a more and more anechoic response like you see here. I see this and my eyes light up. Do you see what I see? It's perfect. It looks so darn good, except it's out of polarity. If I flip the polarity, the phase traces now line up almost perfectly because the driver is very closely matching the target response. We have EQ'd this very close to the actual target. So of course, the phase data, the time data, everything is now lined up for this particular driver. You can see some wiggles in the measured data compared to the target, and you could try to fix those. Like if I call up the EQ, I could try to make some changes to that, right? Get a little bit closer, and the phase traces will get a little bit closer. But ultimately, if I went back to a non-smooth, something like 1/24th, none of this stuff, none of this fuzziness is actually the driver. It's all reflected energy. So trying to EQ some of that stuff out doesn't make a lot of sense. As you go higher in frequency, it's going to be a lot of reflected energy. Tweeters, you know this, are going to reflect, and we can see through that by changing the smoothing. As we go lower in frequency. Sorry, go ahead.
And it's cool that you can see that in both when you're looking at your measured response up there and changing your smoothing, but also you can see it happening in the phase traces too.
Absolutely.
As you get lower in frequency, things start cleaning up and becoming a lot less jagged.
Right, like down in here. So what do you want to try a sub? You want to see what a sub looks like just to kind of prove that point a little bit more?
Yeah, let's try a sub.
Cool. I'm going to dock the EQ. I'm going to mute the mid-range. I'm going to unmute the sub. And I'm going to change this quickly to something else, right? So there's the Lin IR, right? I'm going to zoom out on the Lin IR real quick. And then zoom back in so I can see the beginning of the impulse responses. I still have the mid-range on there. So I'm going to change my target. Go to my targets mode. Hide the mid-range. Unhide the subwoofer. And then come back over into this area, and I'll go back to the zoom. So up on the top, you can see that my magnitude data, the red trace versus the purple, got a little bit of work to do there. Down here, I have the red trace is measured data, purple is the target. I'm going to zoom in on that so I can see the beginning of those IRs. They're pretty close. I don't know that I changed that too much, right? Maybe do something like that. Oops. I'll do that. I'm going to go ahead and zero that out and then come back and do it again, just to be on the safe side. Live demos, baby. There we go. You can see that over here, my measured data is later than my target. So I'm just going to line those up. I'm just going to do that by setting that. That's pretty close, right?
Yeah, you're pretty close there.
Okay. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to switch this back to the phase, right? Now let me change my smoothing back to 1/24th. This is a low frequency driver, so you don't see a lot of jaggedness. Why? Low frequency doesn't reflect very well and tends to go through things pretty well. So I need to put, I already have my low pass filter on. Sorry, I should have turned that off. Oh, that's my target. Hang on. Kevin, you're supposed to catch me on that. So on my output, I switched over to outputs. I have my sub channel selected. I'm going to take my low pass filter, turn it on. It mutes. I unmute it. Right. So now I'm going to take, I'm looking to get this red energy closer to this purple energy, right? I'm going to take this and I'm going to lower that frequency down. It's going to take a little bit, go a little faster. There we go. And you can see that the data is updating. You see the phase is changing. Now you see the magnitude is changing. I'm going to get it pretty darn close. That looks pretty good. I'll undock my EQ and I'll do the auto set EQ to target. And move this out of the way to reveal that's pretty darn close. All right. But notice my phase data doesn't line up anymore. And that's because I've done filtering. And anytime you do filtering, it's going to affect the phase data because it has an impact on that. What I'll do is on the bottom, I'll go back to my impulse response and you'll see that the red one is now shifted. Right. So if I center that back up again and then I come back and do my phase, you'll see that the phase data lines up really close because this lines up really close. And if I start putting more smoothing on, you'll see that the effect is less dramatic because there's not as much reflected energy, but the phase data does clean up and the magnitude data does clean up. So there you go. You can actually see that's really close. Now, if I wanted to, this little tail here, you shouldn't have to. I just want to illustrate something that if I add delay to this, you'll see that that will come down because it's getting, again, the steeper that slope, the more that's going to line up. Of course, it's also breaking down here, and I'd be worried about that because this area up here is outside the sub, and this is kind of in the middle of the sub. So I probably wouldn't want to add too much delay on that, but you could, and you can see the effect that it has. So when we do systems, I went through that pretty quick, didn't I? So.
Yeah, I was going to say, while you're here, we talked about the tools and stuff like that. What about doing that? What happens if you accidentally don't put a high pass or a low pass filter on that sub and do your auto EQ?
So what we'll do is I'm going to reset that output entirely, EQ and everything. I do that by right-clicking on the channel, selecting it, and it gives me the option to reset the output and EQ. The output itself would be like a delay, polarity, and any high and low pass filters or all pass filters and level. The EQ we treat as separate just in case. So we have the ability, so I'm going to reset both. And of course now it's muted, so I'm going to unmute it. And this is an unfiltered response. If I forget, is that what you said? If I forget to put a low pass on that?
Yeah, what happens if you forget to put a low pass on it and then you run
the
your...
world ends, Kevin. You can't do that. So I'll go ahead and try that. I'll put that on. It does pretty darn good. It gets the shape in there. It's sort of a waste. It probably makes a lot more sense to use the low pass filter. Our phase is totally whacked out because it's a very different impulse response now, right? You can see that the sub is arriving way early. That's because I didn't reset that, right? If I do that, now you see it's over here. So my target is up over here in the purple, and I have all this silence before the sub actually kicks in. I'm going to go right there and align that. And if I come back to my phase trace now, you can see that it lines up very similar to what it did before, but this is still kind of goofy here. And that's where the low pass filter could make some sense. So I'll turn that on. These are the tools that you have in your toolbox, so to speak.
And you need to make sure that you use the right tool for the right application.
Without a doubt. So now I'm applying a low pass filter to something that's already been matched to the target. And you can see that there's going to be some changes in the way the phase response looks. And again, right now I'm at 1/24th. If I go to 1/6, it smooths it out quite a bit. 1/3, more smoothing. And an octave. I use octave just as a check because that's about as close to direct energy or I should say anechoic as possible. You're eliminating all the reflected energy. And if you have any issues that can't be addressed by any of the tools that you have, like the polarity, right? If that doesn't help you, or if the all pass filter doesn't help you, you're probably looking at a mechanical problem. You have to reposition something or put something between it and whatever the problem is. And we talk a lot about reflected energy, but it's not just reflected energy. You'll also be able to detect when panels are vibrating. If you can't fix a certain resonance or you're losing a bunch of energy and the EQ just can't get any of it back, you may have a mechanical issue where there's a panel vibrating or something's loose and making noise. That's when, again, you can use your DSP all day long, but it's not going to make the panel stiffer. You have to go in and do some mechanical aspects of that. Or, this is hard for me too, but you could just say, I can't fix that. But remember, when we talk about the steps to tuning a system, the first two steps are, one, get the right gear. Like if you got a pair of tweeters and a 12W7, that's not with the right gear. One of them's good. But ultimately, it's going to be really hard to make that sound good. And once you do have the right equipment, you have to install it correctly. And that installation is some of the things that we can't necessarily tune out with the DSP, those mechanical things, proper gear, proper install. And once you have that, make sure you spend time working on your targets. So what I'm going to do now is I want to show you the targets that we have and what we've done with some of them. So I'm going to go back to my targets mode. I'm going to load targets. I'm going to go back and I'm going to find my JL Audio. Actually, I'll just load the default. This is our default setting. Right.
And keep in mind that, kind of what we're showing here in EQing to and aligning your measured response to your target, you can do that with a single mic. However, when we start getting into being able to look at reflections and creating those transfer functions and stuff like that, that is a Mac specific capabilities on there. So just understand the differences of what we're doing. You can do a lot of this with your single mic, but when you want to start looking at a little bit more in depth and being able to show those reflections and show a lot of the timing aspects and the measured IR response in that, we are getting into the Mac's hardware.
Excellent points, Kev. So what I wanted to show here is when we created our target curve, we obviously applied the band-specific targets for the, for some reason my purple one's off, there we go. For the subwoofers in purple, the green is mid-bass, gray is mid-range, and then the red is tweeter. You could change those if you wanted to. These are just the default colors for our target. They sum together for the yellow response. On the bottom is the phase response, and you can see that the phase trace for the purple will blend right into the gray. And then the gray and the green are merged together. Sorry, to the, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? So there's the green. So the purple and the green are direct overlays. It's hard to even see the difference. And they blend right into the gray, which blends right into the red. In other words, we went through and made sure that our phase was completely aligned as well, so that when they sum together for the yellow response, it's a continuous phase wrap. And again, the shape of the phase is only important for this particular trace. So if I came up here and I brought up my EQ on my target, right, and if I made a change here, you'll see that the phase is changing with it. Both the gray and anything associated with it, all of it is moving together as one thing because it's summed together. And the reason why our targets are a little bit different is because they are accounting for the time domain data. And you can also see that in the impulse response, just like we saw in the real time earlier. So again, here, if I move this, you'll see that the impulse response is moving. Let me zoom in to make that a little bit clearer down here. Let's move this over. All right. So you can see all of that. As I make changes here, you'll see all of the impulse data is also changing with it. They're all directly linked to each other. This is a powerful way of tuning, band specific. So you match your tweeter to the tweeter target, mid to the mid range, and so on. And when they sum together, they wind up doing exactly what the DSP filter was intended to do. Again, the target is literally the exact same thing as the DSP and the amplifier. So you have the same exact tools that are available there to modify the electrical portion of your system. Right. And that all works really, really well if you can see through some of that reflected energy, which smoothing does allow. And very often I get asked, why are there so many controls? We don't usually see that kind of control. Isn't there just one setting that works really well? Well, we think the default setting starts off really well. but we leave the tools in there because there's always reasons that you might want to change. So like at high frequency, 1/24th or 1/48th octave smoothing is insane. You're going to see all kinds of reflected stuff. It's just a mess, and it doesn't mean anything. Your hearing doesn't pick up on that. So by applying some smoothing and getting rid of some of that energy, we can actually see the truth a little bit closer. We can see a more anechoic response and get a better idea what the actual driver is doing with the signal that it's being sent. So that a bit of a distinction in terms of how our targets work when you're doing a match to target. So remember the tools you have: high and low pass filters, an EQ to do the magnitude response shaping. And then on the time-based side of things, we have a delay that we can move the impulse response over or increase the number of wraps and make them steeper. We have an all-pass filter, which is a phase wrap that can be added into your phase data. And that's only really helpful when you're comparing one channel to the next or complementary channels, because the phase interaction is what we care about there. And then, of course, you have polarity and things of that nature for flipping that response. So, Kev, did I get everything?
I believe you did, and just to add into that, really, when we take a look at the target generator that is built into Tune, it is a great modeling software to be able to go through and lay out targets. Now, when you are going in and messing with those targets, keep in mind that if you make a bad target, it will most likely lead you to a bad result. We do give you those options to make your own targets to EQ to target, but we've gotten really good results out of the ones that we've loaded in there already or loaded into Tune 4 software already, and we've had good results with them. So if you're not familiar with everything, use the ones that are in there and get some practice on it, listen to them and enjoy them, make some changes to them, and pay attention to what changes you've made.
There you go. What questions came up in the chat? I glanced in pretty quick.
Really, it's been somewhat quiet.
They're
We
dumbfounded.
learned about the weather all over the country. Dave was commenting that he thinks that most people using the Max system and even just Tune with a USB microphone have no idea how much power they now have in their hands with these tools, which undoubtedly that's what Tune 4 and Max brings to the table when it comes to not just the tuning, but the analysis. It's exciting to see. It really is a game changer to bring this to the market for not just our dealers, but consumers, the DIYers that like to tinker with their stuff. This is something that really gives you that professional level analysis and adjustment abilities. And just always gets me excited. I love seeing comments like that because that means we did a pretty good job with it, I think.
Right.
That's good. Yeah. The comment that Dave made and Rob was elaborating on, the software and hardware together is incredibly powerful. Obviously, if you're using a JL Audio DSP, like VXI or MVI product for right now, Tweak coming soon, it becomes even faster and easier for you to do. You can do a lot of the same things with Max with non-JL Audio DSP, but you have to take the information that you see in the screen and enter that into the other DSP. Here we have the ability of doing it in real time right on the same screen. So it definitely is a time saver, to say the very, very least. So.
Steve, do you want to talk about levels a little bit, like how you get to your levels and lay everything out prior to setting your EQs and your high-pass filters?
Yeah, I can definitely do that for you. So here, what I'm actually playing around with, I'm going to well, right now I have nothing. I'm working on the tweeter response, and you can see this tweeter level is really, really high. The measured response over the target response here. So what I might do in this case, I might go into my targets, select my sum, and I might bring my sum trace up higher so I can get closer to that, right? I can also see that this tweeter is capable of playing lower than what my target is actually asking it to. So one thing I can do on that is I can come to the tweeter trace here. I can look at my crossovers, and I can I'm going to undock this real quick. Right. And I'm going to take the high pass. I'm going to turn on the high pass and low pass tracking. If I link the high pass, that's at 5,000 hertz. and the low pass for the mid-range at 5,000 hertz. That's this area right here. I'm going to scoot that down a little bit because I think that the tweeter can play it. It certainly shows like it can play it. I don't want to go too crazy. I don't want to go all the way down here because now I'm asking my tweeter to play down to like 500 cycles. That's not a good idea. So know that your product well enough to know what it's really capable of. And I think this one's probably going to be okay with somewhere around maybe 3K or something like that. So I can even just go ahead and type that in. So, and you have the ability to type 3K, and it's smart enough to know that's 3,000. So now my high and low pass, my high pass on the tweeter and my low pass on the mid-range tracked. Just for fun, I'm going to turn off the tracking, right? And I'm going to change the high pass to 5,000 again, right? And you'll see my summed response got all weird because it no longer is summing flat. It's summing to something other than flat because I broke the tracking on that. So I'm going to go back to 3,000, and now it sums the way I wanted it to again. So my level is still at issue, which is what Kevin was asking about. So I would, again, stick with my targets, and I would raise this up a little bit more. And what I'm looking at, should I zoom in, Kev? Do you think that would confuse? Or
No, I think we're good there.
Okay, so I'm looking at what I am going to do is I'm going to clean up some of the stuff we're not looking at. I'm not looking at the sum. I'm not looking at the sub. I'm not really looking at the mid base, and I'm not going to look at the mid range. I'm only looking at the tweeter.
Can you change your measured trace color so it's not the same?
I can't. And the way you do that is you go up to the upper right hand corner of the drop down menu that's there. You find the trace. You right click on it, and you can change the color. Select that. And you have the option here to pick whatever color you'd like. What color you want, Kev?
You know what? Anything but red. I always go for the whites, but green's good. That's a perfect one. There you go.
Yeah, I think it pops better online. So now that I have that, I'm looking for the majority of the measured trace, the green data in this case, to be above the target trace. And again, this is coming from the equalization side of things. You don't really want to boost a lot. You want to cut a lot, or not a lot, but cut the appropriate amount. So this little dip up here, that's pretty high up in frequency. I'm not too worried about that. I might change the level a little bit because I know the tweeter is going to roll off at some point. I could do something like, I don't know, something like that. What do you think, guys?
Yeah.
That look pretty good? So I would put it there because I know when I put my high pass filter on, which I'll do now, switch over to my outputs. Take my high pass filter and turn it on. It mutes the audio and my signal all goes away. I'll unmute it real quick. Let me just clean this up a bit. There we go. Okay. So now I have my high pass filter on, and I'm going to raise that frequency, and eventually you'll see the green start to be affected, right? There it goes. Too far. I might make the case I can make that steeper slope.
Yeah.
So let me do that instead of 24 dB per octave. And this is, our rule of thumb, or I should say my rule of thumb, is let the data be your guide. Actually steeper, not less steep. Let the data be your guide. Don't worry about the numbers too much. See what shows up on the screen. And if the data on the screen implies that you can do something different, you should. I don't know if I like that.
Yeah.
I think that's okay, actually. Pull up the EQ.
I was going to say I'd run the EQ and see what it looks like because that's free.
That's free. Auto set EQ is free. So just for the record, I'm using an E on my keyboard to toggle the visible EQ on and off. There's a couple of little shortcuts like that. Like the C key is for coherence. For things like that. So let me go back, E key, and I'm going to go ahead. Am I on green? No, I'm not. So I need to. There we go. Right.
And the V key, as in Victor, refreshes.
Right. When you're dealing with a magnitude response, that's what we're dealing with here, a magnitude response. You can see it's incredibly stable. It's almost like, is this thing on? It's hard to tell sometimes, and you could change that if you want to. So like we can change it to fast. But even there, it's going to be really stable. You can see the coherence is jumping all over the place. 16 FIFO is nice, easy to look at, and stable. And changes you make in the EQ are reflected pretty quickly anyway, right? And I like that. Something nice and stable. I'm going to reset the EQ. V key to get it to stabilize, right? and auto set EQ. Let's see what that looks like. So there's my tweeter. And again, a lot of you guys are saying, oh my God, look at these spikes. You should fix all of those. I want to see if that's reflected energy or not. But before I do that, down here, I want to look at my impulse response. And you see that the green one appears to be ahead of the red one. So if I come down here and I do the Z, yeah, the Z here. So the red is way over here. So I'm going to zoom in on this. And even though my IR is a little noisy, I can still see the beginning of it pretty clearly. Let me zoom in on that. And it's going to be right around there, right? So now you can see that the two impulse responses are fairly closely lined up. That's pretty darn close. I'm going to move this. I'm going to change this to the phase response, right? So again, we're dealing with a tweeter here. So the only energy that we really care about is the stuff up in this area. And it looks like a whole bunch of late arriving stuff. And I can tell that. Why? The steepness of of the wraps on the phase. I can see that this stuff is arriving late. It should be closer to what the red is, but it's not. At this level of smoothing, if I apply more smoothing, like 1/12, it's not just making the lines cleaner. It's actually changing the angle of the lines as well. Right, and as I apply more and more smoothing, you can see where we're going. As I get to the point where I'm near anechoic or anechoic-like, you can see how close those really are. And if you look at the measured data up here compared to the target, if I make some changes to the target like that, I'm getting even closer to it. And those are more significant. It's a closer response at that point. Let's see.
That coherence, we're not worried about that because that's out of bandwidth too. So you see that fuzzy coming down there. That's below where where Steve's high pass filter is. Correct. So we see that fuzziness. We're not worried about it. It's out of the measurement. We're just focusing within that band.
There we go. And then if we go back out to the not so smooth, you can see. Obviously, it's jagged because of all the reflected energy. All of this stuff here is reflections, all of it. And then when you see through that by changing the smoothing, you can actually see what the anechoic response is. That's what the tweeter is actually doing in an anechoic environment. The rest of it is the car. And you can do whatever you'd like. You're not going to change that. You know, the car is reflective at those frequencies, unless you could move the tweeter, maybe change the angle of them and make them, maybe more direct energy instead of, I think in this case, it's on an A pillar. So you have the reflected energy from the windshield as well as the window itself, the side window. So, what else can we show, boys?
We had a question.
Some questions. Mr. Wonderful. It's in his name, so
I see it. Yep.
Chris was asking.
You guys were just close friends, Rob.
Yeah, I'm thinking. He says, "How does a shelf affect the phase visually?" I think maybe he means a shelving filter, such as found on bands 1 and 10 of our parametric EQ.
Sure. So what I'll do now for Mr. Wonderful, I'm gonna make my magnitude response larger so we can see this a little bit more clearly. So what he's talking about with a shelving filter is band number 10 and band number 1 on the EQ for our amplifiers. They have a little toggle switch in the panel, and I can change them from, instead of being a parametric EQ, where I can change the Q as well as the frequency and the booster cut, I can change it to a shelving filter. So in this case, I'll do this, and it's obviously this is a low frequency. I'm just because it was closer to me. Instead of that, I can move it up or down, booster cut, change the frequency, but the Q changes a little bit about the shape this way. So it's the same term, it just is applied a little bit differently. It's not a parametric band, it's a shelving filter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset that, and what I can do is I'm going to take this, change it to a shelf, sorry. Reset. 10 to a shelf. Take 10, and you can see that it changes the level of the tweeter. That's what it's doing. So yes, it's like an EQ, but it's actually more of a level that the whole thing I can drop down. You can see I can take the whole tweeter and drop it down with one band. So it's kind of a waste. You should probably do that with level instead. But if you just want to taper it a little bit on the top end, it's a little sibilant or something, you could take a little shelving EQ and kind of drop it down a little bit. And if you want to see what that's doing in the phase response, what we need to do is make sure that our impulse responses line up so we can actually talk apples and apples here. And you see that they don't line up. So I'm going to zoom out.
Always
You
got
can always tell real data. What's that, Rob?
You always got to have that initial delay set before we look at phase.
Right. So if we zoom in on this, we can see that the green trace is starting late. And you can always tell it's real data because it's jagged like crazy. Again, all that reflected energy. And if I zoom in, if I smooth it, up here, the IR doesn't really change. So you just have to be able to look at the beginnings. My IRs get noisy every so often. All right, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. And I'm using the scale controls, the horizontal as well as the multi-axis. And I use this scale control, which makes the measured data fit in the window so I can see it a little bit easier. So I think this is probably my beginning. So I have that lined up over here now. And if you look, you can see what I mean. The target one is going up, this one's going down, but it's all starting at the same point. So if I look at phase now, it's more meaningful. So let's look at what the shelving EQ is doing to phase. So it's adding a little bit of delay because you see the wraps are getting a little bit steeper, not much. Actually, they're not getting steeper. It's just changing the position of it a little bit. So when you look at the tools, like as opposed to if I did something like this, now you can see those wraps coming in. I'm adding delay. The EQs don't make a huge difference. I mean, they make a difference, mind you, but it's not the tool to use when you're looking at phase. You look at the magnitude response. The effect of the EQ is there and it's real, but I wouldn't use an EQ to try to compensate for a lot of the phase issues that you're going to see. I would use them to compensate for magnitude differences that you see. Hopefully that answers. I know it's somewhat of a convoluted answer, but.
All right. We do have a question from Sacktown Steve, and I'm 99.9999 sure I know the answer, but we'll ask it anyways. He saw a post from 2006 that describes a hack to measure impulse response using REW and a single microphone. Wondering if this would be possible with Tune 4.
Okay, so REW does have the ability to look at impulse responses.
So this is through, he put in parentheses RTA. So,
okay. All right. So I think Sacktown Steve's a regular. If you guys are new to the channel and you haven't seen, Sacktown Steve is a really smart guy and he always has really good questions and he challenges us to answer them. So on Tune 4, if you're not using Max, you do not have access to the time-based measurements like we're showing here. That requires a Max box so that we have timing references and a number of other things. Using a program like REW, if you have an external sound card that you can plug a microphone into it and it has 2 channels, you can create what's known as a loopback. And that loopback can serve as a timing reference. In order to do anything with impulse response, you kind of really need some kind of a reference, like a timing reference. And what a loopback looks like, bear with me one sec.
I can.
This can be a loopback. It's really just a piece of wire that your signal goes into one end, it goes out one end and goes in the other end. So when the signal starts, it's basically the time it takes to go through the wire compared to the time it takes to go from wherever it started through those wires into whatever product you're testing, through that product, any processing you may have, through that into the amplifier that you may have, from the amplifier through the wires into the speaker, from the speaker, time of flight through the air to the microphone. So you can actually do that as a comparison, and that's what the impulse response can do. And yes, REW does have the ability to do that. I think what Sacktown Steve was talking about in the RTA is in Tune, if you only have one microphone, you don't have access to anything other than the RTA and, of course, all the great target stuff that we have in there, but the time-based measurements aren't there. In REW, you can use a different sound card. Not to trivialize it, but Max is like a sound card. And it has the same type of ability. So you could use Max with REW if you really wanted to, but some of the tight controls aren't available there. So I wouldn't call it a hack. Hopefully Steve chimes in to make sure that I'm not missing his point. You can't do it in Tune 4 with a single mic because we don't support the hardware on that. We have our own hardware that we support. Am I getting it, Rob?
I think so. I think he was trying to see maybe if there was something could be on that we have hidden or locked or something.
No, nothing quite like that.
Think about the date on that too. In 2006, was that even capable?
It may have been a hack then. Yeah,
it might have been a hack then, and then they just implemented it into REW. And there's a big difference of being able to do it in REW and being able to do it with a Mac system in Tune 4, where you're doing it real time with Macs and Tune 4, so your adjustments are extremely, instantaneously as you're going through. Where REW, you are able to do it, but every time you make an adjustment, you have to go through and run another sweep. It's not real time like Macs and Tune 4.
That real time expedites it so much. I mean, you could pretty much align everything with Macs and the time it would take to get two speakers aligned with one another using other programs that don't use real time analysis, because you got to run the sweep. You then got to make guesses, run it again. Where with Macs and Tune 4, you can literally walk the frequency until your trace is overline, or just that quicker analysis without the sweeps just makes it so much more quicker.
I learned on REW in doing that, and that was what I started off with. So I kind of had the double negative. One, I wasn't sure exactly what tools to use to fix some of the issues that were going on. And then two, I had to go through and run a sweep. So instead of just being able to say, oh, I need an all-pass filter here, maybe I did a little delay, then I ran a sweep. That didn't work. Then I would use something else. And then, you know what I mean? Like it would, my tuning times have gone from a day on the analytical portion with Tune and Max to being about an hour, which is amazing.
So, Kevin, when you said that you used REW to learn, that reminded me that I may have a better answer for Chris than what I was trying to do with live data. I'll just do it in the target gen. It's the same thing. It's truly the same thing. So here I have, band 10 as a shelving filter. On the bottom is my phase, right? So if I take this and I move it down, that's the effect of a shelving filter on phase, right? So I just took band 10, I made it a shelving filter, and I pulled it down, and you can see that the phase has dropped down, right? If I come up here, it's now wrapping up. Now, bear in mind, this is just degrees of phase, so it's not like down or up. It's just minus 30 or plus 30 or whatever the case may be, and it's the shape. It's kind of like when people say, what are the dimensions of a stealth box? It's like it's a lake. It's hard to measure those things. So it's more of a shape than it is a dimensional thing, right? So if I change,
it's not adding wraps or anything like that.
So I'm right clicking and I'm changing the Q of the shelving filter, and you can see the effect that has on the phase.
And that brings up a good point too. When we think about using EQs, we are fixing the frequency response in there to be able to go through. But that frequency response that we're fixing, there's also that aspect of phase that's being broken in there too.
Yes.
So having the ability to have those EQs work on that frequency response and go through and make minor adjustments to the phase in there, you're fixing the frequency response, but you're also fixing what's broken on that phase aspect too. So it is nice to have those in there and be able to go through and do it. Now, obviously, you're not going to use one just to fix something in the phase. There's better tools for that with your delay and all pass filters and all of that. But the things that are broken from the car, these are the tools that you can use to go through and be able to fix them built into the VXI amplifiers or other DSPs if you're using something else that has similar tools to that.
So I thought it might be fun to just go through and show what I mean by building your targets, right? So here, let me just start over because you were talking there, Kev. So I'm going to reset all the targets. So I just obliterated everything. They're all gone, right? All right.
I'm reading the comments on Facebook while you're doing that.
Bad stuff or good stuff? You laughing at me or?
No, I'm just laughing at, he goes, did Steve say the tweak will be updated to fully work with Macs in the future?
I'm going to reword that. So Jeff had two typos. What he meant to say was, did Steve say that Max or Tune actually would be updated to fully work with Tweak in the future? And yes, that's exactly what I said. That is coming
Sorry.
By mid-year is the target. So by the middle of this year, which isn't that far off, really, we should have full support for the Tweak product using Max and Tune 4. At that point, the plan is Tune 4.50 or something along those lines. Who knows what we'll wind up calling it, but that's the goal. So I'm going to build a three-way system here. I have T1 selected, which can be my tweeter. I'm going to put a high-pass filter on that at 5K, just as a number, right? So you can see that my red trace is now a tweeter, and you can see the phase for that has a wrap, as a high-pass filter will do. I'm going to move on to band number 2, and again, it's currently full range. I'm going to turn on a high-pass filter, and this will be for a mid-bass. Now, this looks confusing because it's a phase wrap at low frequencies. It looks like a roll-off, but in actuality, if I raise this frequency, you see it's a wrap, right? I'm going to bring that up to, I don't know, so what, about 80 hertz, right? We also need a low-pass filter, and we'll do that at 5K to match up a tweeter, right? Look what's happening here. There's a slight deviation. It's hard to see, so I am going to zoom in on that real quick. A little hard to see there. Whoops. Let me zoom back out. Phase ones are tricky, but they don't line up perfectly, and I'm going to show you how to fix that in just a moment. I just need to add a sub. I like keeping a space in case I wanted to do like a dedicated mid-bass and separate the mid-range out. I'm going to do a low-pass filter here, and we'll do that at 80 to match up with the mid-bass, right? There's that, and I'm going to zoom this out. I got that right. So now what I've done is I've got a tweeter, got a mid-range. I'm going to hide this, and I'm going to hide that. So those are the I did something stupid, didn't I? Yeah, I did. You guys got to check me on this stuff. I did a high-pass filter for my sub instead of a low-pass. That wouldn't sound very good. I was tuning a boat the other day, and I did that exact same thing. So, all right, so
we've all done that at some point.
What's that?
I think we've all done that at some point. I know I've turned on the wrong filter a time or two.
All right, so I have a purple subwoofer, a gray mid-range mid-bass driver, like 6.5 or whatever, and I have a tweeter that's going to blend up to it. And those are the individual ones, T1, T2, and T4. I'm looking at the magnitude response or frequency response on the top, and I'm looking at the phase response on the bottom. Right now, none of them are checked off, so there is no sum. So if I click on sum, there's nothing there. I need to check that one. Now you see the sum is the yellow one. If I toggle the sum on and off, I've added the tweeter to the sum. I add the mid-range to the sum, and I add the subwoofer to the sum. And now all of them sum to a flat response. Flat response is probably not what you want. So what you should do here is you select your sum out here, and you should shape it the way you want it. And for that, I recommend using an EQ and levels if you wanted to. So the target that JL Audio uses is actually pretty simple. It's a shelving filter at 115 hertz with a Q of what do I have that at? I made a note of it because I knew I'd forget, and I lost my note.
I was almost super impressed that you knew exactly what that was.
Yeah.
Q is 0.7, and we have a gain of 10.5, right? So you can see that we elevate the bass relative to the mid-range and mid-bass driver. And then on the top end, we have a shelving filter that we put at 500 hertz with a Q of 0.25, and we have a very gentle taper on the response. We taper it off. That tends to be very pleasing to a lot of people. Your mileage may vary, which is why I'm showing you how to make your own curve. So that's it for that's part of things, but I still have some issues in the phase. And what I want to do here is I want to get this red. You can kind of see if I toggle to the red, you see the red is a little bit below the yellow. And over here, the purple is a little bit above the yellow. I want to bring those in. I need to affect that, but I don't want to change the frequency response. So what are some tools that we can use that can affect phase but not affect frequency response?
Well, you've got 2, right? Well, technically 3, I should say.
I'm going to use an all-pass filter. You see, as soon as I turn it on, the red trace has changed. So I'm just going to lower that until I get it to line up as closely as I possibly can, right? You could get really exact on this, and I do encourage if you're building one from scratch to do that. So that's pretty darn good. So now if I toggle between, it's hard to tell the difference between those, which is the goal. So now I'll go to the purple one, which is a little high. I'll turn on. Oh, I already have an. Oh, sorry, purple one. Turn on an all-pass filter there, and go ahead and use the arrow key to bring that up. There we go. So what I've just done is I've made sure that my summation here is correct in both the time domain as well as in magnitude. So well dialed in. That's what we are asking you to do. Spend the time. If you don't like our curves, that's fine. We have plenty of them in there. We've done this to all of them, lined up all the time-based stuff as well as the magnitude stuff. Matching to target, which is the focus of our conversation today. Matching to target is really only beneficial if the target is well defined and fully filled out, fully complete. So using Tune 4, you have the ability to not only do it as a magnitude response, which is common in lots of software, but this is much more powerful in that it's controlling an actual DSP type measurement that directly tracks with the electrical response that you would see from a DSP. So it's much more powerful than a typical target generator. Spend the time, work on that target, and make sure you do the time-based stuff as well, because as you saw earlier, we can look at that to make sure things are aligned. And when you start looking at the more anechoic response, it starts to become much more meaningful and much more powerful. And what I like about it is I can start, once you've done it a few times, I can get pretty good at ignoring the stuff that has nothing to do with my actual tuning. So the reflected energy that I can't fix with a DSP, I don't have to chase that because I can see, the anechoic response by applying more and more smoothing. And just because I worry about these things, when you see the big number on the bottom, that's getting smaller. Okay, so 1/48 is virtually no smoothing. It's a very jagged response, right? So obviously a target is going to be smooth, but if I pull up a measured data for a tweet or something and I put this to 1/48, that is going to be the most jagged that it can be, right? As you lower the bottom number, you're getting less of a fraction and more of the smoothing. So instead of 1/48 of smoothing, 1/24 is double that, right? You're getting more, and then 1/12 is double that. And as you go all the way down to octave smoothing, right? 1/24, right? 1/12, you see that the jaggedness is going away. It's getting smoother, hence the name. But what it's really doing is it's getting rid of the reflected energy, and you're seeing more and more anechoic response. So big number on the bottom means it's not a lot. Okay.
One thing I want to add, because it's come up for me recently, and we've been talking about this the past 2 days, there is keep in mind when you are EQing to this target and you're setting your levels and everything to this target, if you're setting a left to the main target, whether it's a tweeter, mid, and mid bass, and you're setting those each to their individual targets, or maybe you just have a coax setup or a passive network setup where you have a mains on there. If you're setting up left, then right, and you only have one subwoofer channel and you're also doing that to the same target, you'll want to leave your DRC to have a little bit of leeway in there. Because if you think about it, you're setting left and then you set right, then when you combine them that summed response is going to give you a gain in there. So you need to compensate for that. You need to compensate the subwoofer level for that gain that you're going to get when you combine left and right. And that's something that I've come across myself recently and want to explain it. Now, if you have more than one sub channel, then it's not a big deal. You don't have to worry about it. But if you are dealing with just one sub output or input out of one amplifier, whatever there, then you do have to kind of make a compensation for that.
Yeah. Right on. I'm just playing around over here having some fun because this is what I do for fun.
Yeah, we haven't had any more questions come through the chat either, so.
Okay. You know what I like? I mean, if you made the investment and you have a Max box, you're already in, right? Everything that we just did doesn't cost any more, right? Click all you like. It's not going to hurt anything. Be mindful when you're actually hooked up to an audio system. That's what I love about the targets. You can play around with that all day long and learn so much about the interaction of drivers because it is truly an exact electrical replica of what the DSP would do. And that makes it incredibly powerful. And like, Kevin and I were talking about, you can learn a lot just by playing with the targets, and you don't need Max to do that. You have full functionality of the targets mode for free, because we're insane, for free with Tune 4. So please play around with that. Hopefully it will prompt some questions, and we are definitely here to help you with those. Do we have any other questions that need to be answered?
No, if you haven't downloaded Tune 4, download it and play around with it and have some fun. We've got these videos. As soon as we come off here, this video will be available to view on Facebook. And many of our other videos are all preloaded on Facebook. And we are working on getting them over to YouTube in a fairly quicker manner than we have in the past, too. So
excellent. Cool. Well, thank you all very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.